Hey everyone, it's Nadine from Nadine Walks. I'm here today with a little video that's part of a series that I'm calling Camino 101. So I have a lot of information on this channel, some question and answer videos, just all kinds of stuff about planning for your Camino. But I thought it would be helpful to kind of go back to the very beginning and answer a few questions that pilgrims may have as they are first starting out and planning for a Camino. When they first heard about the Camino, they're thinking about walking and they kind of have basic questions of like, what's this thing all about? And I know in my case, that was certainly true for me. You know, I've been walking Caminos for 10 years. I've walked a dozen different routes, but before my first Camino, I barely knew what I was getting myself into, and it was a lot to kind of wrap my mind around. So I wanted to address some of those questions in some videos on this channel. So we're going to start today with this question of, do I have to walk the whole thing? Now, I've seen this question come up occasionally, and I really kind of liked it because it really gets at two different things. The first, it's this notion of the whole thing. Is there a whole thing when it comes to the Camino? Like, is there a correct Camino route, and what is the whole thing if there is? And then the second part of that question is, you know, once you kind of know the Camino you're walking, the route you're going to take, do you have to walk the entire thing? Do you have to walk every step of it? So we're going to kind of address those questions, and I hope this will be helpful to some of you. So the first part of this, right? Do I have to walk the whole thing? What is the whole thing? Now, I think if you have just kind of heard about the Camino, you're really brand new to this, you might think the Camino is one route that leads to Santiago de Compostela, when in fact the Camino is really a network of pilgrimage trails that really run all across Europe. There are a lot in Spain, but there's also some in Portugal, in France, in Germany, really all throughout Europe that lead to Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain. So there is no one Camino route. You know, if you are thinking, oh, I want to walk the Camino, which one am I supposed to walk? There's actually no correct answer to that. You can walk whatever Camino that you choose, whatever route kind of makes the most sense to you or seems the most interesting or the best. Now, a lot of people do walk the Camino Frances for their first Camino. I think the reason for this is that it's the most popular. The majority of pilgrims walk the Camino Frances. It has the best infrastructure for pilgrims. And I think as a first timer, walking this route does make a lot of sense because with the infrastructure, with a lot of other new pilgrims on the path, just starting off as well, it kind of makes for an easier experience and gives you a lot of pilgrim community. But all that being said, this isn't a video about the best first Camino. However, a lot of people do choose the Camino Frances as their first. I will kind of be referring to the Camino Frances throughout this video because I think since a lot of people do choose it as their first, it's a good example to use. But just know that the things I talk about when referring to the Camino Frances can apply to any of the routes. So you've chosen the Camino Frances as your first Camino. Then the question is, where do I start? Am I supposed to start at the start? So all Camino routes have a beginning and an ending. The ending is always Santiago de Compostela. The beginning just kind of depends on where the route begins. And quite frankly, I don't know why the routes begin where they do. In some cases, I assume it's probably arbitrary. Sometimes it might be out of convenience. There may be historical significance. But if we think back to the Middle Ages, you know, pilgrims just left their front door and started walking. So their Caminos began at home, wherever they happened to live. And so I think where we begin our Camino truly doesn't matter. I think in a lot of cases, pilgrims, when undertaking a Camino, they want to start at the beginning if they can, because there is something pretty gratifying about walking a complete route. Even if a route is rather arbitrary, it's kind of nice to do the whole thing. At least I find that it is. And I think in the case of especially the Camino Frances, if you do have enough time to begin in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, it's nice to start with other pilgrims because there are a lot of pilgrims who are beginning their Camino there. And I also knew that I really enjoyed being able to cross the border from France into Spain and then know that I had walked the entirety of Spain throughout the rest of that Camino. Now, beginning in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port means that you probably need between 4 to 6 weeks of walking in order to complete the whole thing. And most pilgrims just don't have that much time. So not everyone can begin in Saint-Jean, and that's okay. Some pilgrims, even if they have enough time, they might choose to start in, say, Pamplona, simply because transport to get there is a lot easier. And a lot of pilgrims are also kind of daunted by that first day from Saint-Jean to Roncesvalles, so they might choose to start a little further on. And there is absolutely no harm in doing that. No one is keeping score. No one is really checking. Even if they kind of check your credential at the end to see where you started from, it's not right or wrong to have started in Saint-Jean versus Pamplona versus Burgos or Leon. A lot of pilgrims who may only have a few weeks, they might start in Leon in order to walk into Santiago. If they have a week, they might start in Sarria so they can walk those last 100 kilometers. Some pilgrims, even if they only have a week, may choose to start in Saint-Jean, walk maybe to Logroño, or as far as they can get, and then in the future, maybe the next year or in a few years, they'll come back, pick up where they stopped, and walk the next chunk. In fact, a lot of pilgrims do this way. In Europe especially, pilgrims will complete their Camino in chunks over a number of years. So there is really no rule that says if you pick a route, you have to walk the whole thing. You can walk as much of the Camino as you have time for, or as much as you're able to. So the second part of this question, though, when we get to this idea of walking the route, do you have to physically walk the whole thing? Is that the right thing to do? So I think to really answer this, the easiest answer that I have is no, you don't have to walk every single step. A lot of pilgrims do aim to walk as much as they can. They're there to walk a pilgrimage, and there is something really gratifying, again, about being able to say, I have walked this entire way. But there are things that happen that we can't always prepare for, like a bad blister that slows you down or stops you for a few days, getting sick, getting food poisoning. Maybe you planned stages that you thought were doable, but it turns out you need to shorten them and walk slower stages. Maybe you met some people that are going at a slower pace than you are, and you just want to stick with them for a little bit longer, so you slow down. But all of that means that you plan for a certain amount of time to get to Santiago, but now you can't arrive there in time. And this happens to many pilgrims. And in this case, most pilgrims will choose to pick a section of the walk and they will skip over it. They'll take a bus or a train and they'll just skip a section. Now, this happened to me on my third Camino. I was lucky enough on my first two Caminos to walk every step, walk into Santiago, receive my Compostela. On my third Camino, though, I got sick and I had to take a couple of days off. And that summer, my plans were really kind of tightly packed and I didn't leave myself any wiggle room on the Camino. And so it just meant that I was about 50 kilometers short of Santiago. I chose to not walk into Santiago and just take a bus over those last 50 kilometers to arrive in Santiago by bus, mostly because I had walked into Santiago already. So I did. I missed those last 50 kilometers and I wasn't able to get my Compostela. That's the certificate of completion that you get. You need to walk the last 100 kilometers in order to get that certificate. And so I wasn't able to get that, but it didn't mean that I wasn't a pilgrim, that I hadn't just walked a Camino, that I wasn't proud of myself for that journey. I still got to arrive in Santiago, stand in the square in front of the cathedral, visit the Tomb of St. James, attend the Pilgrim's Mass. I was a pilgrim. I just didn't walk those last kilometers and I didn't get the certificate of completion for doing that. And so that is the rule when we talk about, do I have to walk the entire way? And my answer is no, you don't have to. However, if you want the Compostela, you do have to walk the last 100 kilometers up and leading up to Santiago in order to get the Compostela. Now, I do want to say that as of this recording, it's early January 2025, there has been some talk about that rule changing. The latest I've heard is that possibly pilgrims will no longer have to walk the 100 kilometers before Santiago. They can walk any 100 kilometers of any Camino route, and at anywhere along the route. So you could start, do the first several days at a Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, then you can skip ahead all the way to just before Santiago. And as long as you walk the last stretch into Santiago, and I'm not sure what this is, but it may be 20, 25 kilometers, as long as you walk that last stretch, you can still get a Compostela. So that's kind of the word on the street. The rule might be changing. I have been trying to follow this closely, and right now there's a lot of talk. Some people are insistent that this new rule is the rule. It is set. It's already changed. Others are saying there's no official word yet. I would just say if you are planning a Camino for, a few months from now, the spring, if it's imminent, still plan on walking the last 100 kilometers and getting 2 stamps a day in your credential in order to receive a Compostela. But I would just kind of stay tuned for more. Certainly if we hear official news, I'll try to come back and do a little video and kind of update about those changes. But just know that that's kind of in the works, but at least as of now, early January 2025, you still do need to walk the last 100 kilometers if you want a Compostela. So I hope that sort of addresses both parts of that question. Do I have to walk the whole thing? That really there is no whole thing, but if you want to do the Camino Frances and walk the complete route, then you would want to start in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, though you certainly don't have to. And if you have to skip parts of that along the way, it's okay. It's even okay if you skip the last sections into Santiago. Just know that you can't get a Compostela if you do, unless the rules change, so stay tuned for that. So if you are a pilgrim planning your first Camino and you have some questions, even if you think they are way too basic, please put them in the comments below because I'd love to address them in some upcoming videos. And that is all for now. I hope you're all well, and I'll be back soon. Buen Camino.